The discovery. The red dust of Mars swirled around Dr. Sarah Chen's boots as she traced her gloved finger along the peculiar geometric patterns etched into the cavern wall. 20 years of Mars exploration had yielded countless discoveries, but nothing like this. The patterns pulsed with a faint blue luminescence that seemed to respond to her touch, defying every known law of physics. "Control, are you seeing this?" Sarah's voice trembled with excitement as she adjusted her helmet camera. "The patterns, they're not just engravings. They're active." "Confirmed, Doctor," came the steady voice of Mission Director James Rodriguez from the Olympus base. "Spectrographic analysis shows energy signatures unlike anything in our database. Whatever this is, it's not natural, and it's definitely not human." Sarah moved deeper into the cavern, her headlamp illuminating more of the intricate patterns that seemed to flow like circuits across the rocky surface. Her team had discovered this network of caves beneath Valles Marineris 3 weeks ago, but only today had they managed to penetrate this deep. The initial scans had suggested artificial structures, but everyone had assumed they'd find remnants of early human exploration. Not this. Dr. Chen called Dr. Yuki Tanaka, her geological expert, from several meters behind. "The mineral composition of these walls, it's changing. The molecular structure is reorganizing itself before our eyes." Sarah turned to see Yuki pressed against the wall, his handheld analyzer whirring frantically. The blue luminescence had begun to spread, forming complex fractals that branched out like growing vines. The sight was both beautiful and terrifying. "All teams, fall back to the entrance," Sarah ordered, her scientific curiosity warring with her responsibility as mission leader. "We need to establish a proper containment protocol before." A deep rumble cut her off, and the cave floor beneath their feet began to vibrate. The blue patterns suddenly flared brilliant white, filling the cavern with blinding light. Sarah raised her arm to shield her eyes, her heart pounding against her ribs. When the light faded, the cave had transformed. What had been rough stone walls were now smooth, covered in what appeared to be holographic displays showing star charts and molecular diagrams. In the center of the chamber, a cylindrical column had risen from the floor, topped with what could only be described as a control interface. "My God," Sarah whispered, approaching the column. "This is a terraforming station." The displays showed the transformation of worlds, barren rocks blooming into gardens, dead atmospheres igniting with life. But it wasn't just a record of past achievements. It was a manual, a blueprint left behind by beings who had mastered the art of creating habitable worlds. Over the next several weeks, teams of scientists from Earth's leading institutions descended upon Mars. The discovery shook the foundations of human understanding about life in the universe. The station was part of a vast network, they learned, created by a species that had seeded the galaxy with the building blocks of life. But the most stunning revelation came when they decoded the first set of technical specifications. The technology wasn't impossibly advanced. It was elegant in its simplicity, built on principles that humanity had been approaching through their own research into environmental engineering and synthetic biology. They weren't gods, Sarah explained to the United Earth Council during her emergency briefing. They were gardeners, and they left us their tools. The implications were staggering. Humanity had been searching for extraterrestrial life, never imagining that they might instead find the means to create it. The station contained detailed instructions for transforming hostile environments into cradles of life, along with warnings about the responsibility such power entailed. As Sarah stood before the council, she could see the mix of fear and hope in their eyes. "We've spent centuries looking up at the stars," she said, her voice steadied despite her racing heart. "Now we know why they seem so empty. They're not dead spaces, they're unplanted fields, waiting for gardeners." The discovery triggered fierce debates across Earth. Some saw it as humanity's salvation, a means to escape the environmental damage they'd inflicted on their home world. Others warned that wielding such power would lead to disaster. Religious leaders grappled with the theological implications of humans assuming the role of creators. But Sarah and her team knew they had no choice but to proceed. The station had activated for a reason. The original gardeners were long gone, but their legacy remained. Like a carefully preserved seed bank, they had left the tools of creation for whoever proved worthy of finding them. The first test came sooner than anyone expected. The patterns that had initially activated in the Martian cave began to spread, following ancient conduits beneath the planet's surface. Within months, the entire planet hummed with awakened technology that had laid dormant for millions of years. Mars, they realized, wasn't just where they had found the gardener's legacy. It was their first test garden. The red planet had been prepared long ago, waiting for a species capable of completing its transformation. As Sarah watched the first green shoots break through the Martian soil in their test dome, she understood that humanity stood at a crossroads. They had stumbled upon the keys to creation itself. The question was no longer whether they would use this power, but how. The patterns continued to pulse beneath her feet, singing an ancient song of growth and renewal. Humanity's greatest adventure was about to begin. And like all gardens, it would start with a single seed. Seeds of change. The first protesters arrived at Olympus Base exactly 1 year after the discovery. Their banners, visible even through the swirling Martian dust, proclaimed Earth first and don't play God. Dr. Sarah Chen watched the video feed from her laboratory, where the walls pulsed with the now familiar blue light of gardener technology. They don't understand, Yuki said, carefully adjusting the controls on what they'd nicknamed the Genesis engine. We're not playing God. We're following a blueprint that's been tested across thousands of worlds. Sarah nodded, but her attention was focused on the holographic display, showing Mars' atmospheric composition. The changes were subtle but undeniable. Oxygen levels had increased by 0.3% in the past month alone. The ancient machinery buried beneath the surface was working exactly as designed, but far faster than anyone had anticipated. Director Rodriguez wants to shut down the primary nodes, she said, running her fingers through her graying hair. The UN Security Council is worried we're moving too fast. Too fast. Yuki laughed, though there was no humor in it. The Earth's biosphere is collapsing. The Antarctic ice sheets are gone. We don't have the luxury of time. A soft chime interrupted their discussion. The lab's main screen lit up with an incoming transmission from their orbital monitoring station. The images made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. Across the vast plains of Acidalia planitia, patches of blue-green algae had begun to spread, following the precise patterns predicted by the Gardner archives. It's beautiful, Yuki whispered. But beauty wasn't enough to quiet the growing storm of controversy. The next morning, Sarah found herself facing the Global Science Ethics Committee via quantum link. Their faces filled a wall of screens, each bearing the same expression of grave concern. Dr. Chen, began Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the committee chair, your team has initiated planetary-scale changes without full understanding of the consequences. The potential for catastrophic failure. With respect, Doctor, Sarah interrupted, we understand these processes better than we understand our own climate engineering attempts on Earth. The gardeners left us complete documentation, including failure scenarios and their solutions. Documentation we can barely read, countered another committee member. We're working from translations of translations. Sarah pulled up the latest Mars data. Look at these results. The atmospheric processors are operating at 99.99% efficiency. The bacterial seeding follows exactly the patterns we've decoded. This isn't trial and error. It's a proven system. A system designed by aliens we've never met, for purposes we can only guess at. Morrison said, what if their definition of a habitable world doesn't match ours? The question hung in the air, but Sarah had been preparing for it. With a few quick commands, she brought up the genetic sequences they'd extracted from the Gardner database. The base proteins, the DNA structures, they're identical to Earth life. Whoever the gardeners were, they worked with the same building blocks we do. This isn't alien technology. It's just more advanced application of natural principles. The debate raged on, But Sarah knew they'd already passed the point of no return. The Gardner systems, once activated, were designed to be self-sustaining. Shutting them down now would cause more damage than letting them complete their work. Meanwhile, the changes on Mars accelerated. The first lichen colonies appeared in sheltered valleys, followed by primitive mosses. Soil bacteria worked tirelessly, breaking down rocks into nutrients that would feed future generations of plants. The planet was awakening from a sleep that had lasted millions of years. But it wasn't just Mars that was changing. The discovery had sparked a revolution in human thinking about their place in the cosmos. The existence of the Gardners proved they weren't alone in the universe, but it also suggested a profound responsibility. They hadn't just found a new technology. They'd inherited a mission. 3 months after the committee hearing, Sarah received an encrypted message from the Chinese Space Agency. Their probes had detected similar Gardner installations on Venus, buried deep beneath the crushing atmosphere. The Russians reported finding traces of the same technology in the ice of Europa. It was never just about Mars, Sarah explained to her team during their emergency meeting. The entire solar system was prepared for this moment. We're not just following instructions, we're completing someone else's work. The revelation changed everything. Opposition to the Mars project didn't disappear, but it was tempered by a growing sense of purpose. Humanity had spent centuries wondering why they existed, searching for meaning in the vast emptiness of space. Now they had their answer. They were the inheritors of a grand project, chosen not by divine intervention, but by their own ability to discover and understand it. As Sarah stood on the observation deck, watching the sun set behind Mount Olympus, she saw the first flock of engineered bacteria rise on the thermal currents, their bioluminescent bodies painting streaks of light across the darkening sky. They were designed to process carbon dioxide, accelerating the atmospheric transformation. "Ready for Phase 3? Yuki asked, joining her at the window. Sarah nodded, thinking of the seeds waiting in their vaults, plants engineered to thrive in the newly transformed Martian soil. The Gardners spent millions of years preparing these worlds, she said. We owe it to them to finish what they started. The sun disappeared below the horizon, but the blue glow of awakened Gardner technology lit the landscape like Earthrise. Somewhere out there, other worlds waited, their ancient machines humming in anticipation of the new Gardners who would finally bring them to life. The first garden. The starship Genesis hung in orbit around Kepler 186f, its quantum sensors mapping the barren surface below. After 15 years of preparation and a journey of nearly 12 light years, humanity was ready to plant its first garden beyond the solar system. Dr. Sarah Chen, her hair now completely white, studied the preliminary scans from the ship's observation deck. At 73, she had fought hard to be included on this mission, arguing that her experience with the Mars transformation was invaluable. Looking at the rust-colored world below, she knew she'd made the right choice. Gardner signatures confirmed, announced Dr. Kai Santos, her protege and head of the detection team. They're weaker than Mars, but they're there. The installation is buried under the northern polar ice cap. Sarah nodded, remembering that first cave on Mars. In the decades since, they'd discovered that the Gardners had seeded thousands of worlds with their technology, creating a network of potential gardens spanning the galaxy. Each installation was dormant, waiting for a species capable of awakening and using it. Surface temperature is -60 Celsius, Kai continued. Atmospheric pressure at 20 millibars, mostly carbon dioxide. It's practically a twin of Mars before we started. Captain Maya Rodriguez, granddaughter of Sarah's old colleague James Rodriguez, joined them at the viewport. The UN Council is waiting for our go/no-go decision. Are we certain this is the one? Sarah gestured to the holographic display, showing the planet's internal structure. Look at the core composition. Active and molten, just like Earth's. Strong magnetic field. All the raw materials we need are here. The Gardners chose well. The decision to expand beyond their solar system hadn't come easily. The Mars project had succeeded beyond their wildest expectations. The red planet now had breathable air, flowing water, and the first human settlements were taking root. Venus was showing promising signs of transformation, though it would take another century to complete. But Earth's continuing environmental crisis demanded they look further. Beginning orbital insertion, announced the ship's eye. Deployment teams, stand by. Sarah watched as the first seeds of transformation were released into Kepler-186f's thin atmosphere, specially engineered bacteria designed to begin the process of atmospheric conversion. Unlike Mars, where the Gardner technology had lain dormant but largely intact, this world would require more direct intervention. Seed pods away, Kai reported. Tracking shows perfect dispersal pattern. Surface impacts in 3, 2, 1. Across the planet's surface, thousands of pods crashed through the ice and into the frozen soil. Each contained a complete ecosystem in miniature, along with the activation codes needed to awaken the dormant Gardner systems. For 3 days, nothing seemed to happen. Sarah remembered the tense waiting during the Mars project. But this was different. They were 12 light years from home. If something went wrong, there would be no quick solution. On the 4th day, K's sensors detected the first sign of change. A faint blue glow emanated from the northern polar region, spreading like veins across the planet's surface. The ancient machinery was awakening. Energy signatures are stronger than predicted, Kai said, his voice tense. The reaction is accelerating exponentially. Sarah leaned forward, her heart racing. This was the moment of truth. Either the Gardner systems would recognize their activation sequence and begin the planned transformation, or the planet's surface erupted in a dazzling display of light, visible even from orbit. What they had assumed would be a gradual awakening was happening in hours instead of days. All stations report, Captain Rodriguez commanded. Atmospheric processors engaging at 300% expected capacity. One technician called out. Subsurface temperature rising rapidly, another reported. The ice cap is beginning to sublimate. Sarah stared at the readings in amazement. The systems here, they're not just intact, they're enhanced. The Gardners must have been preparing this world for something special. Over the next week, they watched in awe as Kepler-186f transformed. The frozen surface melted, revealing ancient seabeds that filled with water vapor from the sublimating ice caps. The bacteria they'd seeded multiplied exponentially, catalyzed by the awakened Gardner technology. But it wasn't until the 2nd week that they made the most startling discovery. As their probes dug deeper into the awakening systems, they found something none of their previous encounters with Gardner technology had prepared them for: a message. It's not just technical data, Kai said, his hand shaking as he decoded the transmission. It's a story. Their story. The message, encoded in the same universal language of mathematics and molecular structures they'd first discovered on Mars, told of a species that had achieved mastery over the physical laws of reality itself. But instead of using that power for conquest or domination, they had chosen to become cultivators of life. They didn't die out, Sarah realized, reading through the translation. They evolved beyond physical form. But before they transcended, they prepared these worlds, prepared them for us. The implications stunned the crew into silence. They weren't just inheriting abandoned technology. They were fulfilling a plan set in motion millions of years ago, when the Gardners recognized that the universe needed more than just observers. It needed caretakers. As the first clouds formed in Kepler-186f's new atmosphere, Sarah thought about all the worlds still waiting, their dormant gardens ready to bloom. Humanity had found its purpose among the stars, not as conquerors or even explorers, but as the next generation of gardeners. Send word to Earth, she told Captain Rodriguez. Tell them we're ready to begin full transformation protocols. She paused, looking at the changing world below. And tell them to prepare more ships. We have a lot of gardens to tend. The Genesis continued its orbit around the awakening planet, its sensors recording the miracle of creation unfolding below. In the ship's botanical labs, The first Earth plants were being prepared for transplant, their genetics carefully modified to thrive in their new home. The first garden beyond Sol was blooming, and with it, humanity's future among the stars. Blooming conflicts. The emergency alert shattered the peace of the Genesis observation deck. Dr. Sarah Chen looked up from her studies of Kepler 186f's rapidly evolving ecosystem to see Captain Maya Rodriguez's face, tight with concern, on the main display. "We've detected an unregistered ship entering the system," Maya announced. "Their drive signature doesn't match any known human vessel." After 50 years of interstellar exploration and terraforming, humanity had grown confident in their solitude. The gardener's legacy had seemed to be theirs alone. Until now. The unknown vessel decelerated into orbit alongside the Genesis, its hull gleaming with an iridescent material that defied their sensors. For 12 tense hours, they waited for any sign of communication. When it came, the message was simple but shocking. "You activate what is not yours to wake," the transmission stated in perfectly formed mathematical equations, the universal language they'd learned from the Gardner archives. "We are the stewards. We watch. We preserve. You must cease." Sarah's hands trembled as she studied the message. After all these years, they'd finally encountered another spacefaring species, and their first contact was a cease and desist order. "Open a channel," she instructed the communications officer. "If they can understand Gardner mathematics, they'll understand our reasoning." The response came immediately. A holographic figure materialized on the bridge, a being of crystalline structures and flowing energy patterns. "We have watched your species," it stated. "You transform worlds without understanding. The gardens must remain dormant until the appointed time." "We've successfully transformed Mars," Sarah countered. "Venus is nearly complete. Kepler 186f is blooming. We've proven ourselves worthy of the gardener's legacy." "You mistake speed for wisdom," the steward responded. "The gardens were sealed for a reason. Each world is part of a greater pattern you cannot comprehend." As if to emphasize their point, the steward's ship emitted a pulse of energy toward the planet below. The blue glow of active Gardner technology began to fade, the transformation processes slowing to a crawl. "Stop," Sarah called out. "There are millions of bacterial colonies down there. New life just taking hold. You'll kill them all." "Better dormancy than misuse," the steward stated. "We have watched countless species discover the gardens. All have failed the true test." "What test?" Maya demanded. "The gardeners left us their tools, their knowledge. We've done exactly what they intended." The steward's crystalline form shifted, creating patterns that seemed to express something like sadness. "The tools were not the test. The gardens are not meant to be awakened one by one, in isolation. They are connected. Each activation changes the pattern of the whole." Sarah's mind raced, decades of research clicking into place. The strange energy readings they couldn't explain. The way each awakened world seemed to pulse in harmony with the others. The increasing speed of transformation with each new garden they planted. "The galaxy itself is the garden," she whispered. "Every world the gardeners prepared is part of a single vast system." "Now you begin to understand," the steward acknowledged. "But too late. The pattern is already disrupted. Your isolated activations have created discord in the design." But Sarah wasn't listening anymore. She was pulling up data from every transformed world, every dormant system they'd surveyed. When she overlaid the patterns of Gardner technology activation, she saw it, a web of energy connecting each point, growing stronger with each world they awakened. "We're not disrupting the pattern," she said, her voice gaining strength. "We're completing it, piece by piece. Look." She transmitted her analysis to the steward's ship. The crystalline being studied the data, its form flickering with rapid calculations. "Your species transforms worlds out of sequence," it stated, but with less certainty. "No," Sarah countered. "We're following exactly the sequence the gardeners intended." Each world we've awakened has led us to the next, each transformation teaching us what we need to know for the following step. The pattern isn't rigid. It's adaptive, designed to guide whoever found it along the correct path of discovery. The steward was silent for a long moment, its crystalline form shifting through complex geometries. Finally, it spoke. There is merit to your interpretation, but the risk is necessary for growth, Sarah finished. The gardeners weren't just creating habitable worlds. They were creating gardeners. The only way to learn is by doing, by making mistakes and correcting them. That's why they left the tools instead of completing the transformations themselves. The holographic being grew still. Others have made similar arguments. All have ultimately sought to use the gardens for their own glory. Then stay, Maya suggested suddenly. Watch us. Guide us. If you've been observing other species' attempts, you must understand the process better than anyone. Help us avoid their mistakes. The proposition hung in the space between them. Below, Kepler 186 continued its transformation, its new atmosphere swirling with the first true clouds the planet had seen in millions of years. You ask us to abandon our role as preservers, the steward said. We ask you to fulfill it, Sarah corrected. Preservation doesn't mean keeping the gardens dormant forever. It means ensuring they bloom at the right time, in the right way. Isn't that what true stewardship means? The crystalline being's form pulsed with new patterns, its energy signatures harmonizing with the gardener technology below. Perhaps there is wisdom in your words. We have preserved for so long, we had forgotten the purpose of gardens is to grow. The energy pulse that had been suppressing the planet's transformation dissipated. Almost immediately, the blue glow of gardener technology strengthened. But now it seemed to pulse in rhythm, with patterns emanating from the steward's ship. We will watch, the being declared. We will guide. But the choice to grow, to transform, remains with you. Show us that our trust is not misplaced. As the hologram faded, Sarah turned to Maya with tears in her eyes. We're not alone anymore, she said softly. No, Maya agreed, watching as the steward's ship adjusted its orbit to better monitor their work. But maybe that's exactly what we needed. Someone to remind us that creating life isn't just about following instructions. It's about understanding the responsibility that comes with it. Below them, Kepler 186 continued its transformation, its awakening now guided by both human wisdom and ancient knowledge. The garden was growing, and with it, a new partnership that would reshape their understanding of their role in the cosmos. Legacy of the gardeners. A century had passed since humanity's first encounter with the stewards. The observation deck of the starship Synthesis, the newest vessel in Earth's gardening fleet, offered a view that Dr. Sarah Chen could never have imagined in her early days on Mars. Now 173 years old, her life extended by the same genetic technologies they used to craft new organisms for young worlds. She watched as 1,000 ships, human and steward alike, worked in harmony to awaken the 100th garden world. The pattern is nearly complete, said Crystal Song, the steward who had become her closest friend over the decades. The crystalline being's form shimmered with excitement, reflecting the combined light of 3 nearby transformed worlds. The galaxy map hovering between them showed a vast network of awakened gardens, each point of light connected by threads of energy that the gardeners had laid down millions of years ago. With each world they transformed, the pattern grew stronger, more coherent. Did you ever imagine this when you first found us? Sarah asked, gesturing at the fleet below. Human ships, their hulls decorated with flowing gardens, worked alongside the geometric precision of steward vessels. On the planet's surface, teams from both species carefully monitored the awakening of ancient systems. We had grown so focused on preservation that we forgot the purpose of preservation is to protect something until it can flourish, Crystal Song admitted. Your species reminded us that gardens are meant to grow. The partnership between humans and stewards had transformed both societies. Humans learned patience and precision from the ancient guardians, while the stewards rediscovered the joy of creation they had forgotten during their long vigil. Together, they had solved the puzzle the gardeners had left behind. Energy patterns are aligning, announced Dr. Marcus Chen, Sarah's great-grandson and the mission's chief technician. All 100 gardens are in harmony for the first time. Sarah leaned forward, her aged hand steady as she studied the readings. The gardener's pattern wasn't just about creating habitable worlds. It was about creating a vast, interconnected network of life. Each garden world pulsed with energy that resonated with all the others, creating something greater than the sum of its parts. "It's time," Crystal Song declared. "The final sequence can begin." Throughout the galaxy, on every transformed world, the ancient gardener technology began to pulse with new purpose. The energy patterns that connected them grew stronger, visible now even to the naked eye. Rivers of light flowing between the stars. "Grandmother," Marcus called out, his voice filled with awe. "The pattern, it's not just connecting the gardens, it's changing space itself." He was right. The fabric of space-time around each transformed world was beginning to shift, creating new pathways between them. The gardeners hadn't just left instructions for creating life. They had encoded the blueprints for something far more profound. They were creating a network, Sarah breathed, not just of gardens, but of space itself. Each transformed world becomes a node, connected to all the others. Crystal Song's form pulsed with understanding. The great barriers of space and time, they were never meant to permanently separate the gardens. Once enough worlds were awakened in the correct pattern, the gardens become one. Sarah finished. As if in response to her words, the first portal opened, a bridge of pure energy connecting two distant garden worlds, as if they were neighbors. Then another appeared, and another. The 100 transformed worlds were becoming a single vast garden, connected by pathways that defied the normal laws of physics. As if in response to her words, the first portal opened, a bridge of pure energy connecting two distant garden worlds, as if they were neighbors. Then another appeared, and another. The 100 transformed worlds were becoming a single vast garden, connected by pathways that defied the normal laws of physics. This is why the sequence was so important, Crystal Song realized. Why random activation would have disrupted everything. The pattern had to be complete before the final transformation could begin. Sarah watched as ships began traversing the new pathways, crossing light years in moments. The barriers that had kept civilizations isolated were dissolving. The galaxy wasn't just a collection of separate gardens. It was becoming a single vast ecosystem. They weren't just gardeners, she said softly. They were unifiers. They knew that life needs connections to truly flourish. Every garden we awakened, every world we transformed, was another step toward bringing all life together. The observation deck filled with light as more portals opened, creating a web of connections that would allow life to flow freely between worlds. The pattern the gardeners had designed was finally complete, but Sarah realized this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. "What do we do now?" Marcus asked, watching as the first settlers began moving through the portals, ready to tend the newly connected gardens. Sarah smiled, taking her great-grandson's hand. "Now we do what gardeners have always done. We nurture. We grow. We create new life and help it thrive. But we do it together, all of us, as part of something greater than ourselves." Crystal Song's form harmonized with the energy flowing through the ship. The gardeners gave us the tools, but what we create with them, that becomes our legacy. As Sarah looked out at the transformed galaxy, she thought of that first cave on Mars, of all the discoveries and challenges that had led to this moment. The gardeners had planted the seeds, but it had taken the combined wisdom of humanity and the stewards to bring their vision to life. "Every garden needs both roots and branches," she said, watching as more ships arrived through the portals, carrying beings from other species who had found their own pieces of the gardener's legacy. "The roots connect us to where we came from, but the branches," she gestured at the glowing web of connections spanning the galaxy. "The branches show us where we can go together." The 100 gardens pulsed as one, their light reaching out to touch dormant worlds that waited for their turn to join the network. The work wasn't finished. It never would be. That was the true legacy of the gardeners, not just the tools to create life, but the understanding that creation itself was an endless journey, best traveled in company. The galaxy bloomed, and in its flowering, a new age began.